These two are a passionate and engaging and relatable husband and wife team who have really created an innovative experiential educational psychotherapeutic work where real life becomes the curriculum. And tonight they're going to discuss the vast territories of what it means to be truly intimate.
Well, thank you, Craig.
Thank you, Mr. Craig. Okay, so I'm gonna start off with a little bit of a little story that was a moment in my practice many years ago that really informed me profoundly and altered my direction forever in how I viewed difficulties in relationship. I received a call from this woman who said that she was dating a man and they'd been dating for a number of months and they just might get married, but only if they sorted out 100 issues that she had.
True story.
True story. Not figuratively, literally. She said, I have 100 issues. If we can sort out these 100 issues, and I hear you're good, Duane. And at that time, I kind of took those the situations as a bit of a professional challenge. I was seeing a lot of clients that other therapists were threw their hands up in the air with, and I would just take them on. And I could always work out some kind of deal to move forward. And so I said, 100 issues, oh my gosh. Well, why don't you both come into the office and we'll take a look at this and we'll see make a plan or not. So they came into the office, and in those days, we're talking in the early 90s or late 80s, somewhere in there, when you didn't have home printers. She went through great meticulous detail to print off and this big poster of the 100 issues with the little boxes beside each one. And she said, here they are. And I took a look at them. And I said, oh my gosh, this is going to take some time. I don't normally do long-term therapy. I was working more on a brief therapy model at the time. And I said, okay, so this is going to take a year, right? Are you up for that? And we're all up for that. So we brought out our calendars. In those days, it was a paper booklet, and we had to write them in for the whole year, 11 a.m. on Thursdays. And we went at it. And each week, at the end of the session, we'd go to the big, she'd bring in the board each time and put it up on the wall, and we'd just start ticking them off. And after about 8 or 9 months, we actually got through the 100 issues. And so I said, when is the wedding? And she said, I'm not marrying him. I said, but I thought we had an understanding that if we work through these 100 issues, you're going to get married. She said, yes, I know, but I will not. I refuse to marry a man that wears socks like that. And I did then what I'm doing right now. I was frozen. For the first time in my career, I had nothing to say. And I just couldn't comprehend this because I just realized that no matter how many issues they had, there were going to be more. So I started asking myself the question, what is the function of this dysfunction? What's going on here? And I realized, and this is what turned me around. And it was a part of the birth of Clearmind is realizing that couples in relationship are not distant because of their issues. On the contrary, they need issues to sustain a certain distance. I'll say it again. Couples are not distant because of issues. And you may think you are, but you're not. You need a certain distance. You need issues to sustain a certain distance, not too close, not too far. There's a certain place that's very familiar for you. We're going to go into great detail about what that is.
So there's your little hook for the start. Now we're going to go about explaining what that means. when you have been in the helping profession for as long as Duane and I have been, and actually when you've even been in it for a short period of time, you realize the incredible primary importance of connection. Connection gives meaning and purpose to our human existence. We are happier, healthier, live longer when we feel connected, when we feel loved, appreciated, and when we're able to love and appreciate people who are close to us. And whatever form your particular intimate relationship might take, Duane identifies as a man, I identify as a woman. We are a couple, so we kind of fit the social stereotypical norm. Whatever particular form your relationship might take. The place, very sadly, where we tend to be at our most unloving is in our intimate relationships. And Western culture sets us up profoundly to believe that the experience of love is going to be had at its most powerful, in its most powerful form in our intimate primary relationships. And yet that is the place where we often are unloving, actually. So what is going on here? We need it, we want it, we long for it, we pine for it. We land in a relationship and we start having issues and we start poking at each other around these issues. So the deal with how we relate to love as adults begins by going all the way back to what happens for us as children, how we are wired for love as children. The very first part of us to kind of come online as humans when we're little infants is our emotional selves. And that is in part a survival reason. It is our powerful bonding process that happens with our primary caregivers. We're wired for love and connection in a very real way. And it's partly, in my view, a spiritual reason for being as well. I think it's actually a beautiful thing, a beautiful comment on humanity. May we all please listen to this comment that we are wired for love and connection before we are wired for anything else.
Send that everywhere across the world
sending it
right
to
now.
the Ukraine in
Get
this
it
moment.
all the way over there.
Love and connection. And Russia.
Yeah, I think you should go all the way.
All the way. And so this is our foundation. As we're young children, we're operating entirely from our emotional beings. Our thought process doesn't really start to come online in a very full way until about age 7, doesn't fully kick in till much later. So we're navigating our whole world around the feeling of, do I belong? And if I belong, I'm safe. Am I connected? And if I'm connected, I'm safe. Uh-oh, I'm not. I'm not. Something happens. If there's a choice that has to be made between preserving our connection with the people who are important in our lives and sacrificing important aspects of ourselves, we will choose to sacrifice parts of ourselves in order to preserve the connection. And that is because, again, the feeling of connection is necessary for our survival as a young kid. So when it feels like something happens and we are disconnected, it is terrifying for a young child. It's terrifying. The next thing that kind of occurs to us is we're then scrambling around trying to figure out, how do I get the connection back? And we have a metaphor that we use to describe what happens for us as humans around this, and we call it the basement. So when I'm talking about these moments of disconnection that happen when we're young children, what I'm describing is something that we call relational trauma. Moments of disconnection from the people who are really important to us. And that can happen in really obvious sort of acts of violence or aggression. It can happen when a child is being abused in some way or yelled at. It can happen in more subtle acts of what are called omission, like neglect, not being noticed, not being cared for in the way,
Disqualification.
not being cared for in the way that you need to be as a young child, to be seen and heard and appreciated and valued. It can happen in acts of oppression, not necessarily even at an individual level, but as at a whole cultural, societal level, where you are not seen, not valued in the same way as others, for whatever reason, your race, your sex, your culture, who knows. All of these are ways in which all of a sudden we feel disconnected from the people who are important to us. We become terrified. And the key to this process is we have nowhere to go with the feelings of terror. And if we have nowhere to go with the feelings, then we kind of just lock them down in our bodies and push them away. And literally that's what we're calling the basement. Mm-hmm. Right? It's feelings locked down in your body. So a personal example, I was a kid who never quite fit in with my peer group as I was growing up. And there was a really, really consistent pattern of me making my way into this little group of girls. And then in my mind, some small thing that I didn't understand would happen, and I would be kicked out of my peer group. So repeated pattern of, oh, I figured out how to belong, and now I don't, I'm out. And these are really, really painful moments for a child. And for sure, in terms of our metaphor of the basement, those kind of moments would leave me feeling like who I am at the bottom of it all is not good enough, is unlovable. And with nowhere to go with that feeling. And then in response to that feeling, trying to figure out, what do I have to do to become good enough? I very much became a people pleaser and a performer. What do I have to do to make you like me?
And I actually, I mean, I've never said this before. The one safe place I felt in the world was with my peer group.
I know that. I know that to be true.
Just was such a wonderful thing to hang out with friends where it felt safe. And school, I loved, not because of the studies, just because of the access to so much social possibility. In any event, my home, I grew up in a home that was characterized by a binge drinking Irish alcoholic father. I was the only son. I had 3 sisters. I had a mother, and my father was very, very, very abusive towards my mother, punishing her for basically what he would pontificate in his drunken frenzies, that she ruined his opportunity to become a professional baseball player, which wasn't that far-fetched from the truth. Actually, he did give up the possibility of a career in baseball, but he got my mother pregnant when she was 16 and he was 22, and subsequently had 3 more children. But when he drank, it was like he would just torture her and us as secondarily, just by the madness that would occur in our house, violence, broken bottles, blood, horrible things. I needn't go into all the details, but I certainly was impacted profoundly about what it meant to be male. That I am particularly inheriting the genealogy of that possibility, that men are bad, men are evil, men can hurt, men are guilty, and I'm one of them. And I lived in the core of this, in my basement, of this profound belief that I'm defective, and substituted something else to replace that. Which is, I became a bit of I used to just say, I just became the rescuer of women. I was like a Superman. But it wasn't just to impress women or take care of women. It was also just to show the world that there's something else somebody could do with power. So I was always into doing something pretty extraordinary, heroic things. I spent most of my early life doing kind of heroic, people taking notice things, newspaper articles, things that I did, all as to compensate for what I feared I was inside. The degree that I had to do that equaled the degree that I had this suspicion of myself that I was just essentially flawed.
So we wander around, all of us, with these basements that began in a moment of disconnection, where we have had to lock our feelings down, where we are believing at some level that there's something wrong with who I am, my very nature, which sounds like a thought, but it's not really a thought, it's a feeling. And we end up in our adult lives kind of ensuring a safe distance to make sure that nobody actually gets in to the place where we fear that we are flawed. We don't necessarily know we're doing this, but it particularly acts out with the people that we fall in love with.
Yeah, because they have power and they're important. Those are the ones that have a particular passport to this part of us, because the basement was formed, these beliefs in the basement were formed with people that had power and that were important. So when somebody else has power and is important, that's when everything gets fired up.
So you fall in love, somebody is walking closer and closer and closer, and you're not necessarily aware of this, but all of a sudden deep inside goes, uh-oh, uh-oh, if you really knew me, what might you find in there? Uh-oh. And we mistake the fear that we are feeling inside with something they are doing outside. And we start to blame our pain on some part of their being. The other person is doing this, therefore I feel this.
It's his socks. That's it. I'm going to focus on the socks. That is the function of the dysfunction. I hope you begin to appreciate how important that we prize issues as a way of distracting from focusing on what we're frightened of inside of ourselves. Better to focus on something outside of ourselves to explain the dilemma that's going on inside. When somebody's actually getting close, they're knocking on your door. And we don't want to answer it, because if they come in, they may walk all the way into the basement. And we can't have that. So crisis, conflict emerges, and it shocks all of us when it happens. And many relationships end at this point when it reaches this stage of conflict or crisis. We're here to tell you, with the proper template, the proper understanding, the proper support, and the proper experience moving through this, that this is when a relationship can finally actually begin rather than end. That a relationship becomes profoundly intimate, when the one that's locked in the basement is actually now part of the relationship. And it isn't just flawed, defective attributes. Actually, they're the opposite, because we've made up about ourselves at the basement. I am not defective. I am not flawed. I'm actually quite a loving, caring, giving human being that deserves connection and love and caring back. But I would never know that if I would never visit it or never invite somebody into that place with me. But this is where relationship can finally begin. But we don't do that. We can't stand the anxiety. The anxiety is so large that we want to alleviate it. We want to get rid of it. So we start what we call acting out or acting in behaviors to dismantle it. And we unconsciously are committed to certain behaviors to render down these feelings that are beginning to haunt us. We can't stand it, and we are so committed to certain. It's like we have a toolkit that we inherited from our families of origin. We saw certain behaviors, understood certain behaviors, weaponry, all kinds of different things that people did to mitigate difficulty. They emerge and we start taking them on. And so we go through all kinds of behaviors. There's acting in and acting out. Acting out always involves, it's like an exaggeration of the feeling that becomes bigger and expressive, whereas acting in is wanting to kill it. So we're just going to walk through.
Just for an example.
Just examples. We'll just list these in rapid order. So the first one that a lot of us were, and if we're taking a look at the world situation right now, is aggression. I'm just going to be right. I'm just going to push you down. I'm going to take over. I'm going to make threats so I don't have to feel anxiety. Don't you get close to me. And you start having rules about how things ought to be. And also, a very common one is triangling, where we use gossip and affairs when people are at coffee shops. Why do we get together to have coffee all the time? Because we like to talk about somebody that isn't there, rather than talk about ourselves, really.
Right? When you're having an issue with your partner, who do you go to?
Your best friend.
To chat about that.
And affairs, of course, that's a huge one. And there's the compulsion to fill the emptiness inside of us gets desperate. We start developing sexual, gambling, shopping, all kinds of addictions to try and give ourselves what we think we are missing, but it involves some pretty dangerous behavior. And Catherine can do this one.
Do you think, Duane? How come you want me to do that?
I'll do the flip side of it.
Do you think it might fit something personal about me? This one? So overfunctioning means if a relationship adds up to 100%, and the healthy thing would be that you do 100% of the 50% of that relationship, right? You do your half. Overfunctioners are typically over here at 90%, doing more than their share of the relationship. And it's overfunctioning can look very pretty, but it is a form of control, right? Messing around in someone else's backyard so that you don't have to feel the anxiety that erupts inside of you if you aren't in control.
And then there's acting in, where we try and minimize the feeling, make something disappear. And this is where we could describe a whole lot of mental illness that ultimately could come from that attempt to just bury the feeling. We have suicidal ideation and depression, and of course fantasy and escape and pornography, TV, the internet, where we can actually have a seemingly a connection with something without having to risk any kind of legitimate relationship. So it could all become cyber, it could be TV, pornography particularly, where you can fantasize having a relationship without anybody even knowing you.
We have addictions of substance and food, and then the opposite of overfunctioning, which is underfunctioning, because guess what? Overfunctioners require a partner. And the perfect partner for an overfunctioner is an underfunctioner. We have also distance in relationship, avoidance, cutting off relationships, and something called emotional cocooning, which is like fusing together, you and me against the world.
You and me, baby.
And so the point of all of this is just to give you an idea of the sorts of things that we start to do to avoid anxiety, to avoid the uncomfortable feelings inside of ourselves. And
you have to understand that any one of these behaviors If you have a sensational loyalty to one, you may just start experiencing Groundhog Day for the rest of your life because you won't get out of it. Those behaviors end up producing and generating the very thing they're trying to get rid of, which is the conflict and crisis. None of these behaviors add up to a long-term safety. They all generate the conditions for how you made up what's in your basement to begin with. For me personally, you know, if I'm frightened of criticism from an important other because, you know, my dad was a bad man, if I'm going to do everything to avoid contact so I don't get criticism, I end up getting criticism. The very thing I'm defending against, I end up experiencing. It doesn't work. We don't know that. We keep trying harder and harder. And the world right now, look at it. Everyone's doubling down on their particular anxiety binding mechanism, which whether that's, and that they're interacting out, whether it's personal in relationship or provincial or federally or internationally. It doesn't work. And yet we all want the same thing at every level. So we have to actually come to a place where we educate ourselves enough and discipline ourselves enough to actually stop.
Which is, despite the fact that Duane's getting very passionate right now, easier said than done. Because the thing that is driving the defended behavior is a frightening feeling inside of us. And most of us aren't aware of the anxiety trigger for the behavior. We just quickly do the behavior that the feeling is telling us to do. Oh, I feel threatened, better get aggressive. Oh, I feel anxious, better overfunction. We may not even have the awareness to catch that moment of anxiety that wants to kick in the bad behavior or the unhelpful behavior. And so we'll give you a personal example of what this looks like in terms of relationship dynamic. Very early in Duane and my relationship, after we fell in love and moved in together, we got into, as many relationships do, we got into a very painful dance that was like this kind of cycle. And the way that it would work is that I, as an overfunctioner, was quite convinced that I knew how to be close. And I was championing and cheerleading and planning all kinds of activities for Duane and I to spend time together and to get to know each other and to be close and to be intimate. So I would overfunction and I would plan, and Duane would be running and avoiding and distancing, and off he would go.
Doing heroic things that were very important.
Not at home, though. And we all pick up our particular toolkit, as Duane said, from observing what happened in our family of origin. We learn a lot about what love looks and feels like just based on our sort of the soup in which we lived in our family of origin, right? The feeling context in which we actually lived. So I champion, I cheerlead, Duane avoids, I start getting frustrated. I am annoyed about this. This is not okay. Mm-hmm. But in my family of origin, we don't get angry and aggressive.
You just get cold.
Yes. Instead, we
frigid, cold.
Instead, Duane, do you have feelings about
that? Yeah, I want
to have a little minute
express
to
myself
talk
a
about your
little
feelings.
bit.
Right? Instead, I have learned to practice the fine art of passive aggression. And I know there are some of you who are my people out there right now. I can feel you. Here is how this works. He has annoyed me. I silently broadcast my displeasure throughout the room and in the environment. I avoid eye contact. I can feel myself beaming my displeasure around.
It impacts everything, by the way. The plants are dying, the cats are hiding.
If you should be so bold as to say, Catherine, is something wrong? What do you think my response will be to that question? No, I'm fine.
You wouldn't say it like that.
No, it would be slightly.
Do it like how you would really do it.
No, I'm fine.
That's it. You would actually be completely still.
Yeah,
yes.
there's no smile on that face.
Yeah.
Because he ought to know himself what he did wrong, right? So I would be broadcasting my silent unhappiness. You might have noticed, just even on your very brief acquaintance with Duane over here, that he is not a subtle human. So what was your response to my quiet displeasure, Duane?
I would say, and again, I always feel horrible when I say this, because I'm not maniacal. But it's amazing what we'll do on the spot just to get out of the heat. And I would say occasionally, just occasionally, maybe even rarely,
that is not true.
Kath, maybe this isn't working out. Yeah. And I wouldn't say that to end the relationship. I had no intention of leaving the relationship. I had actually not a lot of intention to totally enter it either. I would say that because it would just sort of stabilize everything into this comfortable distance where she would start moving the goalposts again to make sure I didn't leave and things would return to our dysfunctional, comfortable normal.
Mm-hmm. So that threat, right? We would get into a little thing and he would end it by throwing out that threat. And then that would fire up my people pleasing, the thing I learned on the school ground, overfunction, cheerlead, and away we'd go, right? Around and around that circle. That was our own particular dance pattern. If you asked me what the issue was, it's Duane's inability to be intimate. Thank you very much.
And if you asked me, I mean, if you would just stop being controlling and all over me every second, just give me some goddamn space, things would be fine. I think you got a problem, Mm-hmm.
So again, right? Couples are not distant because of the issues. Unconsciously, we need issues in order to sustain this safe distance.
And yet our default in its attempt to make things better only makes things worse. Again, I don't end up avoiding feeling like I'm flawed or defective. That's a message I start getting where I'm just dealing with somebody that's really cold with me now. And she's by the same token, ends up dealing with somebody that's distant, just like on the schoolyard and critical. And there we are. And we're two,
we were professionals.
We're professionals. We know what we're doing.
And so as Duane said, the key really here is to stop, because the problem is being driven from an inside activation. It's not, I'm not saying that we don't do crappy things to each other in relationship, we do, but it's being fueled by this inside issue. And so our first task here is to stop doing the things, stop doing the dance, stop. And one day, 5 years into our relationship, Duane said the thing, Catherine,
maybe this isn't working out.
And I stopped. I have been doing a lot of reflecting on that moment because this is a key moment in our relationship where thankfully we found our way out of the painful reinforcing pattern and moved into more of an upward spiral. I think from this perspective, 56 years old and looking way back, that I actually stopped because I had run out of things to try as an overfunctioner. In all humble honesty, I just didn't have it in me to keep trying the same thing, and I didn't know what else to try. However, whatever the reason, I stopped. And
But that was still extraordinarily brave, because you knew stopping was going to leave you in a place you hadn't been before, which is alone.
so our first step to move out of the crisis and to be able to address all of these crazy patterns that we get ourselves into is something that we call containment. It means stop the behavior, feel what you're feeling inside of your own skin instead of jumping out and trying to blame your pain on someone else.
Looking for the socks.
Contain your feelings. Don't leak them out onto other humans. Contain them and actually let yourself feel them. It's not comfortable. I get it. We're wired as humans to want to avoid the discomfort. But I will tell you something really critical about feelings, and that is that if you can't selectively numb, so if we want to have joy, love, passion, all of the wonderful, great things that we all want out of life, that those feelings, those emotional experiences use exactly the same network in our bodies. Anger and passion, fear and excitement. If you think about how just the experience of those feelings in your body, they're really similar. And so if we want to be able to feel the good stuff, we have to be able to feel, period.
You have to be. I don't know if there's words that we can use to totally describe what has to ultimately be experienced, which is what we do in our workshops. But when you finally allow yourself to feel what's in that basement, and that basement, you have other family members in there, generations of them that have done the same thing. And for you to take the step to finally feel it, bringing all parts of you back together again, you are a hero, a profound hero. You are now going somewhere where for generations, nobody in your family system has gone before you. You're entering a territory where you're recovering not only yourself, you're helping others recover theirs too. It is profound. It is electric. It is alive, and it's scary, but it is magical, entering that territory and starting to look around what can happen there.
So as you stop your traditional anxiety binding behaviors and let yourself feel, we turn instead to reflecting instead of reloading our familiar strategies. As I said before, when something triggers us, it just feels like the thing happens and the response instantly. That's how it feels, right? I feel anxious, I overfunction almost instantly. And the reality is that between the thing happening, the triggering thing, and your response, there's a space. And in that space is your power. In that space, we stop, we let ourselves feel, and we reflect on what that feeling has to teach us about ourselves. What do I fear is happening here? What do I fear this moment means about me?
Is it true? What I worship as a fundamental belief for myself personally, that I'm defective and I'm flawed and men are guilty. Is that actually true? Dare I consider the possibility that there's something that I'm not, none of those things. I'm an innocent human being and a boy that really needed help and love and care, and still do. Maybe I can reflect on that wound inside of me instead of focus on her to explain how it got there, because we end up blaming that one for what's in there when we've had it in there all along, even before we met that person. We have postulated that if you legitimately for 15 minutes in the middle of one of those triggers, legitimately reflect and take another look around. Who are you actually? What is actually happening? How much am I just reenacting on Groundhog Day. If you legitimately reflect for 15 minutes, you will change the course of your life. What you see there, you will never be able to forget, because it'll be completely diametrically opposed to what you made up about yourself in the basement. You just have to see it once.
And so in that moment, going back to 5 years into our relationship, when I stopped my overfunctioning, let myself feel the anxiety that was driving it, the fear that I was not enough as I am. Fear that drives all overfunctioners is that who I am as I am is not enough. I have to work for love. I have to earn love. I am not worthy of it just for being. And I thought to myself, well, okay, so what am I doing working so hard to make this relationship work? In many ways by myself at that time. What am I saying to myself about who I am in that action? Am I not, by my very own action, separate from Duane's threat? Am I not, by my very own action, saying that I am unworthy of love? Teaching myself that I am unworthy of love. And if this relationship is not working for Duane, what am I doing controlling him and trying to make him stay there? I came to a place where I thought, okay, if I'm alone, it's okay. I want to be with somebody who wants to be with me. And so I went back to Duane after a couple of days of really kind of just quiet reflection. I took his hand and I said, I really love you. And I really want this relationship to work. And the next time you say to me that you don't think it's working, I'm going to believe you.
Whoa. Now what? Now what? As I said earlier, it takes two people to actually engage for the relationship to evolve together. It takes one person to invite the possibility. It takes two to make it happen in relationship. And here I was at a crossroads that was very familiar. Here's another relationship that's ending. Here is another relationship where I feel like maybe I haven't cut it and I'm guilty and I'm bad and I'm wrong and I'm confirming my defectiveness. Maybe I should just cut too now and get out of here. But instead, it just came to a stage in my life where this Groundhog Day for me personally was all too familiar. And I came back to Catherine after 2 days and I said, I'm sorry. And I meant it. Maybe for the first time in my life to that degree. I had said I'm sorry before, but it was more like, I'm sorry, okay? Like, can we just move on now? No, this was, I'm sorry. I am sorry. I'm sorry. Every time you invite me home, I have to revisit the one I came from. And a lot of bad stuff happened there. And I've been punishing you for what happened there. And that is just wrong. That's wrong. All you're doing is trying to be close to me, and I can't stand it because I think I'm some kind of defective human being, and I've been running and hiding, and I'm not going to do that anymore. And you're never again going to hear me explain my pain by what you are doing. I have a problem. I have a problem. And I'm going to start dealing with it.
So out of that reflection comes some kind of vulnerable communication. And when people are vulnerable, it invites connection.
Can I just talk about that part that happened for me with that? I felt things I had never felt before. I felt magical. I felt alive. I felt wonderful. I didn't know that that's where it was.
Right? Because vulnerability invites connection. It's literally when you open up the door to that basement and let somebody in there, instead of guarding it and poking at them to keep away, it's an entirely different experience. Literally, it pulls you out of the basement and back into life. When I was looking into Duane's eyes, I could see his worthiness and I could feel my own. That moment of vulnerability and connection is then the correction for all of the crazy stuff that we have made up about ourselves in the basement. It is the place that we are going here. And it is ultimately the purpose of intimate relationship, in our opinion. We need somebody knocking on the door to that basement. The point is we're supposed to open the door and let somebody in. That's what's supposed to happen. You open the door and you let somebody in, and you let somebody love you in the place where you need it the most. And if there is anything that we do really beautifully at Clearmind, it is these last few steps. Vulnerability, to find out what is happening in that basement, what is hiding under your defense. Who is that person in the basement? Connection, correction, so that you emerge feeling your own worth, not just knowing it in your head, but actually feeling it.
You experience it. That's when it's integrated, not just reading about it or watching a movie about it or fantasizing about it, but letting yourself actually experience it from every part of you. Every part, particularly the one in the basement.
This is certainly the experience of the Awakening Workshop, and Duane and I are describing this moment that was a pivotal turning point and that became the template for the way that we deal with conflict in our relationship, so that it can be an upward spiral as well, right? We're describing how this played out as a metaphor in our relationship, but very literally in the Awakening Workshop, we deliberately support people to go down into their basement and bring others with them. Because this problem happened in relationship with important other people. It happened in a moment of disconnection. The healing is the connection, right? Whether it's in a primary relationship, whether it's with other humans who are just caring about you in whatever form that happens, that is key. This is not something you're ever going to be able to do reading a book all by yourself. You will get lots of insight, lots of understanding, and maybe a book will inspire you to new action. But the experience always has to happen with other human beings. This is where we find correction, and ultimately where we find celebration, which is the point of it. That's the point, is to feel good. The point is to feel good.
This is your natural state. This is your natural state. Don't give up on it. It's waiting for you all the time, and it's so close. It's so close by. You have no idea how little it takes to gain so much by simply answering the door.
So before we turn it back over to Mr. Craig, I just want to say something.
Oh.
So we were speaking of the Awakening, which is the front door to our organization, and we're also extremely excited to announce that we're going to be offering a program about how to thrive with relational intelligence starting in October. So Duane and I are excited, over the moon, excited about that. It's going to be a 20-session weekly program. So watch for us, find out more information. So thank you, everybody, for your time and attention.